All right, John Trimble tells us to go in through the front door when we introduce our subject. And I want to talk about what that means. And I also want to think of your introduction as something that can be a narrative, something that it's a story that you're going to tell to your reader to get them interested in what you're talking about. So let's see how you do this. Whoops. First of all, I want you to think about yourself as a reader and what you look for in a piece of writing. And as a reader, when we pick up something to read, we think, first of all, what is this writer talking about? Why are they talking about this? And we actually think, am I having fun reading this? And part of that is based upon, does the writer seem interested in their subject? Does the writer have something interesting to share? Am I interested in reading more? As Trimble says, if you've convinced your reader in your opener that your writing takes work to read, you've probably lost her. She's only human after all, and first impressions prove hard to shake. She'll know from experience, like you, that the quality of an opener tends to forecast what follows. If, at the very outset, a writer seems bored, unwilling to use his imagination, indifferent to his reader, and unclear in his thinking, he's apt to remain that way. But if his opener reveals passion, a clear, perceptive mind, and a flair for drawing in the reader, the odds are he'll stay true to form. Here are some tips for writing a good opener. The key is that you immerse your reader in the experience of your subject. And I'm going to give you two specific ways that you might do that. The first is to introduce your subject by describing a specific experience that you've had with it. Try to activate your reader's senses by providing details that tell your reader who, where, what, when, how, and why. Describe that experience so that it comes alive for your reader. The other idea, if you're writing about a novel or a story, you can actually introduce your subject by beginning with a concrete description of details from the novel. Is there a specific scene, event, or detail from the novel that you could introduce in your opening? You could actually start with that example from the novel as a way of drawing in your reader to your subject. Remember, always be concrete. Specific, concrete details are much more interesting than vague statements. Here's an example of how to tell a story about an experience that you had with the thing you're writing about. Before I first read George Orwell's 1984, I already had a fear of Big Brother. I remember seeing an image of the two big eyes watching me on a mural near my house in Pasadena. The phrase, "Big Brother is watching you," would echo in my head as I rode past on my bike. I didn't know who Big Brother was, but I knew that he couldn't be trusted. There was something sinister in those eyes. All right, now I didn't get to my thesis yet here, but I hope I drew you in to my essay. And if I was going to write a thesis, it looks like I'm really focused on the sense of Big Brother and surveillance and what that means. But I didn't start by saying I'm writing a paper about Big Brother and surveillance, right? I drew you in with a story about my experience with this subject. Now, if I was going to try to bore you, I might take the long way in. And here's an example of the long way. George Orwell published 1984 in 1949. It is one of the most famous dystopian stories of all time. Winston Smith, the novel's protagonist, works for the Party, the group that controls everything. He is afraid to say or do anything that will get him killed by the Party. One of the themes in the book is fear. Fear is something we all relate to. All right, this is not a bad introduction. It's giving us a focus, it's getting to a focus, but it's just not as exciting as the other version. This is just a group of statements. This person is not telling us a story. So if we were going to revise this, I would suggest that the writer perhaps take a moment from the novel where we see Winston being afraid, and perhaps use that describe that in detail to really draw in our reader into the story. We could also talk about our own experience with fear and tell a story about that as a way of drawing in our reader. The key is to try to find a way where you immerse your reader in the experience of the story in one way or another. Illustrating your points with details is really the best way to go. So before you start to write your intro, be sure you have a strong thesis and have on hand a list of details, apt quotations that you can use for your intro. Give it a try. Rework it a few times. If it's not working after a few tries, move on. You can always come back to it later. And here's some other tips that you might use for your intro. The first is to use simple, natural prose. The simpler, the better. You could come back later and spruce it up, but simple prose is clear prose. Let your ideas alone do the impressing. Make your intro full-bodied. 2 or 3 sentences isn't enough. But don't make it barn-sized. Your reader will be exhausted by page 2, wondering, why put everything in the first paragraph? Consider opening with a dramatically brief sentence, about 4 or 5 words long. This will compel you to begin with a bold assertion. If possible, organize your opening paragraph so that the biggest punch, the strongest statement of your thesis, comes at the end. All right, give it a try, and remember, this is a draft and you can keep working on it.